Talks between negotiators trying to reach a Gaza ceasefire have ended in Cairo without a deal. The Hamas official said his delegation was leaving for Doha for further consultations. Palestinians in Gaza have been pinning their hopes on the outcome of the talks, hoping a temporary truce would allow them to return to their homes. But in Israel, hopes are fading that a deal acceptable to both sides can be reached at all.
These Israeli protesters are demanding their government push on with its plan for a military operation in Rafah in southern Gaza. Many of them are relatives of soldiers killed in the war. They believe a Rafah incursion is the best way to pressure Hamas to release the Israeli hostages it still holds. Visiting troops in the central Gaza Strip, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant indicated that he agrees with the protesters.
There are concerning signals that Hamas is not planning to accept any deal or agreement with us. This means an operation in Rafah and in the entire Gaza Strip in the very near future.
Gallant's sentiments were echoed in a video message from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Capitulating to Hamas's demands would be a terrible defeat for Israel. It would be a great victory for Hamas, Iran and the axis of evil. It would show great weakness to our friends and enemies, bring the next war closer and push the next peace agreement further away.
For many displaced Palestinians in Gaza, the resumption of ceasefire talks ignited their longing to return home.
There's a great sense of hope and anticipation as we have longed for months for the negotiations to succeed. So we and all the displaced people can go back home. We yearn for stability and bringing an end to the war and the destruction we have witnessed.
Many hope a ceasefire would end the bombing and allow in food, medicine and other supplies that can save lives. Nahed Al-Masri, a grandfather, has found a cooked meal for his family of 16. The food distributed by the charity World Central Kitchen is helping them survive.
Sometimes we have lunch but we don't have dinner. And sometimes we have breakfast but we don't have lunch. We must manage. Whatever food we get from outside is enough. We share it among ourselves and say thank God. There used to be trucks, but now there are no trucks. We haven't had vegetables for a month and a half.
With the UN saying parts of Gaza are experiencing famine, the need for a truce, even a temporary one, is all the more urgent.
For more, let's bring in German-Egyptian journalist Karim El-Gawhari in Cairo. Karim, good to see you again. The talks have ended. Hamas has now left Cairo. Tell us, what does this mean in terms of now reaching any kind of ceasefire deal?
Well, these negotiations were going on since Saturday for 2 days, and it was negotiations with the Hamas delegation, Egyptian mediators and Qatari mediators, and the head of the CIA, William Burns. Not much came out to the public about really what was negotiated exactly in the last 2 days. But now the Hamas delegation is leaving Cairo, and CIA head William Burns is on his way to Qatar, trying to save what is there to be saved. It is difficult to bring a final judgment if this is a failure of the negotiations or if they will continue. Hamas is already saying that their plan is to come back on Tuesday to Cairo after they consulted with their leadership to continue the negotiations. We don't know anything about the Israeli side. Their delegations was not present here in Egypt because they were waiting what result this negotiations will bring. We have no idea if the Israeli delegations might then come on Tuesday when Hamas is coming back. So it's all a little about out in the open. But the biggest sticking point, of course, is the following: is Hamas is asking for guarantees for a permanent ceasefire, either from the US, from the other mediators, but at the end, of course, they have to get this guarantee from Israel itself. And they were asking for withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. And that is something that is not accepted for Netanyahu. He says he wants to push on with the Israeli offensive in Rafah. And that is the gap that is so difficult to bridge. And we don't know if the negotiations failed or if they are just deferred to next week.
Thanks for that, Karim. That was German-Egyptian journalist Karim El-Gawhari in Cairo. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Israel has closed the Kerem Shalom border crossing into Gaza after Hamas launched an attack on it. Israeli media say several people have been injured. Now, Israel's military released this footage that it claims shows Hamas fighters firing at the crossing. The militant group has claimed responsibility for the attack, saying it was targeting Israeli soldiers in the area. The Kerem Shalom crossing is the main entry point for aid into the Gaza Strip. DW Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes joins me now in the studio. Shani, good to see you. Is the attack on Kerem Shalom earlier today putting more pressure on Israel to reject the ceasefire deal and go ahead with their plans to launch an offensive in Rafah?
It definitely helps Netanyahu remind the people in Israel who he's dealing with. You know, this is also partially what we're seeing in the back and forth in these negotiations. Both sides are trying to seem tough and to say we are not afraid of war, we are not afraid of confrontation. We have seen Netanyahu already yesterday releasing messages. He's adamant on going into Rafah regardless of what happens to the deal. This is sort of the Hamas saying, sort of bring it on. We're not afraid. We can still launch rockets at Israel, which means that definitely we're not deterred, and we will see more of this back and forth. And we're seeing that both sides are, on the one hand, signaling they want the ceasefire, but then on the other hand, also trying to say we don't, we're not desperately wanting it. We're willing to go on fighting. How much of it is just, rhetorics connected to negotiations? How much is it really another step into further escalation in the region? We will know very soon.
Shani, there's obviously a broad range of opinions, but tell us, what do people generally in Israel actually want? Do they want a ceasefire deal and the release of hostages, or is there more support for an offensive in Rafah?
Well, the issue of the hostages, which is the heart of the matter now, when we talk about why would Israel even want to have a deal, that's because of that. There's 133 officially Israelis that are kept in Gaza. We don't know the conditions of many of them, how many of them are alive, but there are at least several dozens who are alive, and there's a need and there's a growing pressure from the families to bring them home. And there's wide support for that. But what matters to Netanyahu is not the wide support in the Israeli public, but rather where does his base stand? Netanyahu seems to be caring very much for his political future, and he wants to guarantee the support for the base. And there we see a lot of support for Rafah offensive, even if it means that the lives of those hostages might be jeopardized for that reason.
Shani, now the cabinet of Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered the Qatari broadcaster Al Jazeera to be shut down in Israel. Tell us, why is that step being taken now?
Well, that's an interesting and very good question, because we know this topic has been coming back and forth, in Israeli media and discourse along the years, and definitely in the last months, again, since October 7th. It seems like it's either Netanyahu playing politics, trying to seem tougher, because we know there's been a lot of support from his base and a lot of push from his base to shut down the Qatari Al Jazeera channel, which matters a lot to the Qataris as a symbol and who they are. It's part of their soft power in the world. And at the same time, we know the Americans were against it. We also know within Israeli Mossad heads, the head of the Mossad were against that, in the sense we don't want to alienate the Qataris. We need their support in the talk. We need their support in leveraging their influence on Hamas. And by doing that, it's another way for Netanyahu to toughen his positions maybe and signal more that he's adamant to go further on with operation, with offensive ground operation in Rafah more than anything else.
That was DW Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes. Shani, thank you so much for that analysis.